Let's go to the New South Wales Deputy Premier now, the Nationals leader, John Barilaro. John, if I could get you first on borders, this is a Queensland constituent, but it must be driving you nuts to see this lack of cooperation, lack of common sense on the Queensland-New South Wales border.
Yeah, Chris, it is. And watching today the display celebrating that Queensland have now won the right to host the AFL Grand Final. They flew in a whole heap of dignitaries. They claimed that they've been isolated or somehow managed. Looking at some of that footage today, there was not a lot of social distancing happening between the Premier and all those individuals. So the truth here is the only crisis that we're facing in Queensland and on this border is an election crisis, and maybe the polls are saying something different to the Queensland Premier. This afternoon, my own office, because I've been sick to death of banging on about it, I'm trying to get these restrictions lifted and some compassion shown to a number of cases, and one that I'm dealing with today where a father is in a Brisbane hospital. He's asked for his two daughters to come across from Narrabri to visit. He's been told that may only have a couple of days left, and yet it sits on, my understanding, within the Department of Premier Cabinet in Queensland, and no one seems to have any urgency to sign it. But we've reached out to the Premier of Queensland's office today. I've tried asking for the mobile number of the Premier, rejected. We've asked maybe just to organise a phone hookup, no such success. It's clear we have an issue here. Hopefully the National Cabinet on Friday can deal with it, but at the end of the day, I am sick to death of, coming on your show or talking in the media about what is happening on this border. We are hurting people, we're hurting the community, and we're causing an economic crisis that we haven't seen the results of, and in the months ahead you'll see some of the damage from what has occurred. There
is essentially no coronavirus issue in Queensland, and there's essentially none in northern New South Wales either, yet we've seen this baby's life lost. You've just heard Luke about jobs that have been lost. We've had students and families on last night where they're torn apart, and you've mentioned another tragic episode. What do you think is going through the Queensland Premier's head, the Queensland Government's head, when they're doing this to people, yet allowing all the bigwigs from the AFL to breeze in?
Well, look, Chris, I think initially their polling must have shown quite early that if they stay strong in protecting Queensland and the citizens of Queensland, that it might have been favourable for the Premier and leading into this election. But I tell you this, I've been a marginal seat member for a very, very long time. How quickly the electorate turns on you when you start to overplay a situation. I think from the moment of last week when that young couple were refused entry or the ability to get in there seamlessly into Queensland for care for their unborn twins, now with the continued mess that's occurring on the border and, in one way, having the AFL dignitaries in there today to show off their AFL claim, in my mind, I think she'll start losing support. And we've got more issues on the Victorian side of the border, yet we've been lifting restrictions and we'll continue to do that because even Daniel Andrew has actually been able to work with Premier Gladys and with our health ministers, and we've been able to find ways forward. But it's just a blockage, mate. It is just a blockage, and they have no interest in working with New South Wales.
I've got to give you credit for that, your government and you in particular, because you do have bigger issues bordering to the south onto Victoria, where obviously there is a much bigger COVID problem, yet New South Wales has been more cooperative in trying to let those Victorians come across the border and get about their lives. So kudos to you for that. But back to your point about polling, this just makes me sick that politicians would be thinking about polling at a time like this. This is about families wanting to say goodbye to a dying father. This is about families wanting to be with their children. This is about jobs and livelihoods disappearing. It's about common decency, isn't it? Not polling.
No, this is all about politics for poor people. It's that simple for the Premier of Queensland. There's no question they've been on the ropes. They haven't run a great state. Polls were showing maybe things weren't looking great. COVID comes across. You never let a crisis go by without playing the politics in this case. And but I think the Queensland people will see now it's gone too far. No compassion at all shown by the Queensland government in dealing with an issue that isn't somehow stops at a border. And to your point, we haven't had actually a case north of Newcastle for 100 days. And when I say north of Newcastle for 100 days, but previously that was only one other case. It's in Sydney and nowhere else.
It is nuts. You could not make this up. It's heartbreaking. Now, I want to go to another issue, though, briefly, if I could, John, this idea, this Koala legislation, where some of your own national colleagues are saying they won't stay in the government if this goes through. What is driving this? We're all in favour of maintaining habitat and protecting species. Now, I know a little bit about this, and I can tell you now, koalas are not under any threat of extinction, and there's plenty of habitat. What's driving this? Is it that Environment Minister again and his desire to be popular on Twitter?
Well, Chris, it's clear. Chris Gulaptis, who's the member for Clarence, who today has spoken out. Firstly, can I say that he has 100% my support. I want members of the National Party to speak on behalf of their community and our membership. And what the Koala SEP, is what we're calling it, does is sanitises regional rural New South Wales, technically attacks property rights of individual landholders, be it farmers, those that might have a bit of private native forestry on their land. It actually stops from even the opportunity in the generations to come, the decades ahead, maybe to use your land for urban sprawl that's happening in the regions. You know, the opportunity to actually bring people to the regions and build new residential estates. And what Chris has said is true. It is an attack on his community. And for that, I'm going to stand here as the leader of the National Party and say good on him. And I'm not going to hide from that. But he's not the only one. I can tell you I've got half a dozen members that are prepared to sit on the crossbench if we don't resolve this. Now, this is a planning issue. It is a planning issue. But I tell you what, mate, it's one rule for the city and one rule for the bush. Just recently, they've been approving residential developments on the edge of Sydney, and there's issues around habitat. Guess what? Those approvals happen. While we lay record amounts of bitumen and concrete and build buildings in Sydney, we use regional and rural New South Wales as a biodiversity offset so that we can feel happy in Sydney because we might not have enough greenery. We sanitise the regions. And Chris Gulaptis today, rightly so, has spoken out. We've been trying to negotiate with the Minister for Planning. We've been trying to negotiate an outcome for the people of regional rural New South Wales. I don't blame his frustration, but he's not alone. And as the leader of the National Party, I'll always back one of my people in when he's fighting on policy, and that's exactly what he's doing. He has my support, has the support of the party. So
you go to the wall on this one. It's fix this legislation or the coalition is finished?
Well, my view is simple. We have to fix the legislation. There's actually not an option for politics here. It's either we fix it, or I'll bring a repeal bill in, or I'll bring a bill in to override it, and then we'll test the numbers on the parliament floor. You know, look, I work well with Gladys and the Premier. We have a great relationship in our partnership in relation to the coalition. I believe we can resolve it, but it's been 6 months in the making. We've been taken as fools, and that's how I feel. And I've been at the heart of the negotiations. My members have been part of those negotiations recently, and they are frustrated. And there'll be more said by many more of my MPs. Chris was the first to break ranks today. As I said, I back him in 100%. I know someone would say, well, how crazy are you, the Deputy Premier, talking about disunity, but not when it matters on policy that actually impacts on our industries, on our communities, and the future of regional rural New South Wales.
John Barilaro, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Extraordinary stuff there. The Deputy Premier of New South Wales, the cute, cuddly koala, it's tearing the New South Wales cabinet apart. You heard it there. There'll be more to come from that. Mark my words.